On the 4th of July, I went camping with my friends near the local lake. We set up our camping gear in the woods and hung out by the lake all afternoon. The weather was perfect, and we took turns jumping into the water from a tire swing. You know, the usual stuff. I was having a great time, but as I was wading through the water, I suddenly felt something touch my foot. I could just reach the bottom of the lake with my toes, and I had been digging them into the sand that felt like muck. At first, I assumed it was a fish or something. I moved my foot over a bit, but I felt it again. I rubbed my toes on the surface of the sand, trying to figure out what it was. It had a bumpy surface, and some parts of it were a little bit hard and sharp. Suddenly, I envisioned fingers trying to claw at me from the bottom of the lake, and I jerked my leg back. I swam back to the rest of the group and told them what I had felt, but they thought I was just trying to scare them. I insisted that I was telling the truth, but I could tell that nobody believed me. Although, of course, nobody else dared to swim in that spot afterwards. I laughed it off and tried to forget about it, but there was a queasy feeling in my stomach. When it got dark out, we went back to our camp and had a bonfire. Thankfully, nobody was telling scary stories. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, and I felt much better the next morning. I figured that I had been drinking and I must have let my imagination run away with me. Somebody suggested we head back to the lake again, and I agreed. I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing in the water, but when we reached the lake, there were cops all over the place. We asked them what was going on, and they said they had found a body of a missing woman at the bottom of the lake. He pointed to the exact spot where I had been swimming the day before. Shivers ran down my arms when I recalled the fingers touching my feet. My friends were pretty shaken up too, and they never called me a liar again. I eventually went back to that lake, but not until a year later. This happened a number of years ago, but I'll never forget it. I was about 10 at the time, and my family lived in the suburbs. Our house backed onto the park, so I would go out there to play all the time. Every July 4th, the park hosted an Independence Day celebration with food trucks and amazing fireworks. I looked forward to it every year, and it was always the highlight of my summer. But that year, it became one of my worst memories. As I walked through the families settling down on the grass with their lawn chairs and picnic blankets, looking around for my friends, I noticed an elderly man sitting by himself off to the side. He smiled at me as I walked by, and I remember feeling bad for him because he was all alone. I looked back at him later, hoping he had been joined by family members or something, but he was still by himself. Once the fireworks started, I forgot all about him. I was hypnotized by the brilliant colors in the sky and the loud bangs that reverberated in my ears. I laughed and joked with my friends. I devoured a fully loaded hot dog. I stared at the cute girls sitting near us. And then, just like that, the sky went silent and it was all over. There was a disappointed hush in the air as mothers began gathering their children for bedtime. Naturally, I had no desire for the night to end, so my friends and I stood on the edge of the crowd where we would be less visible. That's when I saw the old man again. He was leaning back in his chair with a blanket over his lap. I thought he had fallen asleep, and I was debating trying to wake him up when my mom saw me and dragged me home. I woke up really early the next morning, just as the sun was rising. Normally, I would have just rolled over and tried to get back to sleep, but I had a strange feeling that something was outside. I had no idea what it could be. I just knew that I wouldn't be able to fall asleep again until I had checked. So, I got out of my bed and peeked through the curtains. My bedroom was on the second floor, so I had a clear view of the backyard and the park beyond it. The yard was empty, but when I glanced toward the park, my blood froze. The old man was still there. I knocked on my parents' bedroom door and told my mom that there was a dead man in the park. She said that I was being silly and he was probably sleeping. I told her that he had been there all night, and she mumbled that maybe he was homeless. "He's not homeless, he's dead," I told her. Eventually, I convinced her to go and check on him. She insisted I stay home, just in case, but I followed her into the park. And as soon as I got near him, I knew that I'd been right. His face looked peaceful, but his skin was pale and he was clearly not breathing. When the paramedics arrived, they concluded that he'd had a heart attack and died on the spot. Now, every 4th of July as I watch the fireworks, I imagine what it must have been like for that man. Did he realize he was dying? Did he try to call out for help? He had been surrounded by people, and yet he couldn't have been more alone. I live out in the country, so I don't interact that much with my neighbors. I know who they are and I wave to them if I'm driving or walking past, but that's the extent of our interaction. One night while I was in bed, I heard fireworks going off at my neighbor's house. It was July 4th, so that wasn't unexpected, but it was about 4 o'clock in the morning and I was a little pissed that they were still celebrating. I was debating whether to trek over there and tell them to shut it, but as I was thinking about leaving the comfort of my bed, the fireworks stopped. I thought it was kind of weird that they had only set off like 2 fireworks, but I was thankful for the peace and quiet. I figured maybe they had set them off by accident, and I was glad I hadn't bothered to get out of bed. I was even more glad the next day when I found out what I had really heard. Apparently, the bangs I heard in the early hours of the morning were gunshots. One of my neighbor's friends went to visit them later that day and found the couple dead in their bed. Nothing had been stolen and there was no trace of the killer. To this day, their murders remain a mystery, and I can't help but think what could have happened if I had gone over there. If I arrived while the killer was there, would I have been shot too? Or would I have gone outside just as the killer was leaving and caught a look at their license plate? Honestly, it could have gone either way, but one thing I know is that I couldn't have saved my neighbors. They died instantly, probably never knowing what hit them. There have been some theories about who the killer was, but none of them have been proven. Some people think it was their estranged son who was triggered by something and came back to the family home to kill his parents. But I saw the son at the funeral, and his grief seemed real to me. Another theory is that it was a burglary and the killer got spooked before they could actually steal anything. That one seems pretty unlikely to me. Whoever it was, I hope they receive justice, either in this life or the next. Like I said, I don't know my neighbors that well, but they seemed like good people. They didn't deserve what happened to them.